to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and of course a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Townsend Guard. I'm a law professor, and I just wanna quilt. So today we talk to Xenia Cord of Legacy Quilts. Xenia is being inducted into the Quilters Hall of Fame in July of 2018. She also is part of the American Quilt Study Group. She is an advisory member of the International Quilt Study Center and Museum, and she's the owner of Legacy Quilts, which is an antique quilt brokerage company. So we had a lot of questions to ask Xenia. So what drew you to quilting?
Mostly because I was teaching folklore and American studies, and quilting fit very nicely into that and had become a very popular commercial thing in the early 80s.
Yeah, so that's an interest. So you were seeing it as folklore, sort of looking at in terms of folklore, but you also were seeing the rise of it in commercial settings.
Absolutely. It was after Jonathan Holstein and Gail Vanderhoof did their exhibit in New York and sort of announced that Amish quilts were art and belonged on the wall. Everybody sort of sat up and took notice and thought, well, if they belong on the wall, I better get one.
That's really interesting. And how do you think this? How do you think this impacts sort of what quilting is? I think it's like a tremendous change, don't you think? Like the idea of like what the Houston Quilt Festival is just like, I imagine those 100 years ago could never imagine that was taking place. Am I wrong about that?
Well, I don't suppose anyone earlier could imagine an event like that. But they had their own events that were hugely significant and involved quilts. In, for instance, the middle of the 19th century, the first statewide agricultural fair in Ohio had something like 50,000 people who came. If you can imagine that, 1850, Ohio.
That's amazing.
50,000 people came to visit the state fair, and a very large component of that state fair was handiwork by women, and particularly quilts.
That's remarkable.
So we didn't invent the large gathering of people with quilt interests.
That's really
interesting. It's been
interesting.
going on for a long time.
And so tell me more about sort of what do you think the sort of quilters that have no historical background, what should we start to I have to tell you, I'm a law professor, but I also have a PhD in history, so I love history. But where do you think that the role of history, what role do you think it plays in quilting now? And what should we be looking for in this project in terms of the historical elements?
I'm not sure I know how to go at this question.
Okay.
My observation is that the mass of quilters today either don't have an interest in the history of the technique that they're doing or are willing to ignore it. A lot of them just don't know, but it doesn't seem to impact what they do. They're doing the here and the now and seem not to feel particularly connected, I think, to quilters of the past. And I'm not sure that it's necessary to feel that connection, but if you're involved with quilt history and with antique quilts, of course, as I am, then you see that importance in an entirely different way.
Yeah. We saw it with the 1930s fabrics and the Civil War fabrics, but even that isn't that's not at the forefront at the moment, I would imagine, right? It's more...
that's a media-driven thing.
Yeah.
There's a demand for fabric, and there's a demand for fabric that represents certain eras. The accuracy of some of those fabrics is in question, but again, when you're looking at today's commercial market, that somehow that doesn't seem to matter. I mean, for instance, we talk about Civil War fabric, but who is producing fabrics during the Civil War?
Right.
You know,
Right.
the South had the cotton, the North had the mills, and never the twain shall meet. So there was a disconnect there, and clearly the whole effect of the war was to severely hamper the production of cotton goods in this country for the war years and for some time afterward. So how can we talk about Civil War fabric?
Right. And so I have like 1,000 questions, so I'm going in random ways. So let's say I'm a quilter and I know nothing about history. Where do I begin if I do feel like, okay, well, I want to understand the history? Where do you suggest someone begins, and how do they incorporate that into sort of what they're doing as a quilter? I know these are hard questions, right? I don't really know how.
Not even that, that's
right.
Yes. Can you please detail the Statue of Liberty for us by using your finger and just touching one part of it?
Exactly. Well, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I just think that sometimes, I mean, well, first of all, I think the industry is so gargantuan at the moment that it's hard to even sort of get a grasp on what it is exactly. But then the history part, I think, is super important. I mean, the whole concept of building blocks, like the whole nature of what quilting is built on tradition and on people using the same things and making them new. So I think
I would absolutely agree with you. And I think if you're interested in learning more about the history of the skill that you're developing for yourself, probably one of the better places to go is to the increasing number of books that we have that are available to us that really have good, well-researched, sometimes segmented history about quilt making and quilts and quilt history. That certainly will give a new person a start. And I would suggest reading anything that was published by Barbara Brackman.
Yeah. And what about the American Quilt Study Group? What role does that play in?
Well, there you have the aggregate, I think, in this country of the quilt researchers who are producing the current good works. I think one of the things we're really very fortunate in is that most of the authors who have done significant research in quilt history are still alive. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have some venerated books from the past, and those authors have also passed, but we're always learning. And so as important as those books were as a beginning, there is information that has superseded some of the ideas that are published in those books. That in itself can be something of a pitfall for people who are still untutored and don't have a thorough understanding of the whole field. So they'll find a book and decide that reading it, that everything in it is gospel. And in fact, many of those ideas have been replaced by current research, which is a little different.
That's really interesting. And tell me a little bit about sort of the International Quilt Study Center. You're also
first, the American Quilt Study Group.
Yeah, we can do some more on that. I'd like to know more about that.
I think it's a tremendously important organization because what it is a member organization. This is not a group. This is not a bricks and mortar organization. It doesn't maintain a library. Everything that it maintains is either digital or encompassed in the people who are the members. And so it's a really significant and very individual kind of group. It's quite different from most other professional organizations, if you will, that have their basis in a discipline. The International Quilt Study Center is, as you probably know, based in Lincoln, Nebraska. So is the American Quilt Study Group, but they are not arms And the International Quilt Study Center is held collection of quilts in the world. So that in itself it becomes Mecca.
That's really interesting.
A lot of people interested in quilt history.
So can you, the internet cut out right in the middle of what you were saying. So can you tell us one more time about the difference between the American Quilt Study Group and the International Study Center? That's where it cut out, which is ridiculous.
The American Quilt Study Group and the International Quilt Study Center are both headquartered in Lincoln, Nebraska. The International Quilt Study Center and Museum is on the campus, the East Campus of the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. And the American Quilt Study Group is about 2 miles away in its own office. They are not arms of each of the other group, either of them. They're separate but cooperative.
And so, how did they both end up in Lincoln, Nebraska? Do you have any idea?
Well, it had to do with the fact that there was a lot of overlap in the people who were interested in developing the museum and the people who were already members of the American Quilt Study Group. And it happened at a time when it was feasible for the American Quilt Study Group to move from California, where it had been headquartered, into a more encompassing and useful physical situation. And at the time, the woman who was president of the American Quilt Study Group lived in Fremont, Nebraska, which is not very far from Lincoln. And so the campus at Lincoln seemed to be a good place to have the headquarters for the American Quilt Study Group moved to. So that's where it went.
And I've become friends with Pam Weeks, who I think went to the seminar and is at New England Quilt Museum, and
yes,
right, and she says that the annual seminar is the most amazing, best thing she ever goes to. So tell us a little bit more about what the seminar is and what happens during that.
Through the year, we have people who are in the organization who are doing their own private research in topics that interest them. And every year there is a call for papers, and those who have developed their research to the extent that they think they're ready to publish will submit their papers to AQSG, and they're vetted by a blind committee that reads all of the papers and then selects a number of them to be published in that particular year. The basis for seminar is that those people whose papers are to be published that year present the papers as part of the seminar. Seminar has been expanding regularly for, the last 15 or 20 years. It keeps taking on more and more aspects. And so it's now a 4-day event that has on-site tours to places of interest in the area. The seminar moves around the country, and that's in an attempt to make it accessible to our membership who live, in different parts of the country, and also to allow those who attend to experience the quilt collections and the historic sites connected with textiles that exist in that particular area. And so there are tours off-site and on-site. There are study centers, which are 2-hour intensive research courses, if you will, organized by people who present some really fairly esoteric themes, sometimes topics. But the study centers are always a huge success, and they usually oversell, and sometimes we have to put on duplicates of them. That's how popular they are. We have the paper presentations, and we have regular seminar sessions, dinners and speakers and all that, as you have with most seminars, I think.
Yeah.
But it's the advancing of research either through the paper presentations or through the study centers and the tours that are really the most important things about the American Quilt Study Group. That and the networking that goes on, and I can't stress that strongly enough.
Yeah.
It's particularly for people who are attending for the first time and are perhaps new to this whole idea. There's a certain amount of awe in recognizing someone whose name you have only seen on the spines of the books that you love, and realize that here she is in front of you, and you can talk with her, you can have breakfast with her. You know, it's just the networking part is just astonishing.
That's really cool. Now, what about the quilt study as part of the American Quilt Study Group? Can you tell me a little bit more about that and how it works?
Oh, you're talking about the study quilts?
Yeah, the study quilts, yeah.
Okay. Every other year, a theme is picked, and those people who would like to participate are invited to make a quilt replicating or being influenced by a quilt from whatever the time period or topic area is, and to learn something about how the original quilt maker was successful with the product that she made by trying to repeat that experience for yourself. And so that happens every other year. And this year there are no quilts, but in 2018, the study is...
Oh, I have it in front of me. 200 years of solid color quilts.
Solid color quilts. I was trying to remember if it was more than one color. Yeah, solid color quilts. And so that, that actually gives considerable latitude, because your solid color quilt can be something that was made in the 1920s, something that was made in the 1820s. And so you pick your own resources there. And that's also a competitive thing, because those quilts often travel, and because of logistics, only a limited number of them can travel.
That's really right. It's saying that 25 will be selected for a traveling exhibit. So tell me a little bit more about this. So if you say, I want to participate, I want to experience this, you're looking for a quilt from the 1800s to 2000s. And is it that the quilt itself was solid colored, or that you're recreating it as a solid color?
No, the example that you select has to be solid color.
Interesting. And then you're doing research on it, or you're sort of replicating how it was created? Like,
the research is involved with the actual fabric manipulation and the processes that you go through, that you are similar to what you expect the original quilt maker was doing.
That's really cool. That's amazing. What a great thing. And how many do you get? Obviously, you get more than 25 quilts that you're choosing between them, but that
we have had up to 50.
Wow, that's amazing. That's so cool. All right, so tell me a little bit more about the other side of Nebraska. Or just down the street. Tell me about the international Quilt Study Center. Tell me what goes on there.
International Quilt Study Center and Museum.
Right.
Yes. The collection that's there, that was the nucleus of that entire museum, was a collection that was established by Robert and artist James. And they also had the wherewithal and the generosity to not only donate their collection to the university, but also to establish a foundation that was largely responsible for building the museum, which has had 2 editions.
Wow.
Yeah. And it hasn't been there that long. I can't tell you exactly when.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly when it was founded, but within the last 15 years. And it's just an astonishing building. In itself, the building is an artwork. And then the collection that's housed there is significant, as I said, largest publicly held collection in the world. And it is, in fact, an international collection. It started out being American quilts, but now extends to quilted textiles, historic quilted textiles from all over the world.
It's really cool. And tell me, what do you think the relationship is between the museums and what museums are doing, and what role do you think the museums sort of play within this larger context of the quilt world?
Well, clearly they serve as repositories for quilts in many instances. The major, and I'm sure you're aware of this, is that all museums are under financial stress, and they are not funded particularly I'm thinking in terms of state museums, not funded to a level that would allow them in many cases to do major displays, major exhibits, because of the expenses involved in doing that. Many of them, particularly the more localized museums, are not funded well enough even to be able to adequately care for the textiles that are in their possession. So, I don't know where you want me to expand on that.
No, I mean, I think it's super important. I think that, you sort of see like these different levels. You get museums, you get all of the exhibitions and the competitions, you get regular people quilting and sort of the consumerisms of quilting. Then you get sort of historic. It seems like there's different buckets. They all, go back and forth. But I think that museums are a critical part of, I think it's what you're saying about that moment that changes it, that we see quilts both as art and as folklore and as culture, and that is part of the museum's preservation component is really important too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I know that a few years ago, we were all totally shocked to be told that the State Museum in Illinois had closed, and it had closed within a matter of days.
Really?
Yes.
And so what happened to them? What happened to the
Well, it was a political thing,
yeah.
Mostly. It was not, well,
Right.
Illinois has its financial problems, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
but that was a political thing. It was an effort to draw a certain amount of attention to the fact that there were people in the state who had the power to shut down such things as state museums.
That's crazy.
And so the people at the museum were told, if you have things here that are borrowed, I'm thinking of particularly the quilts, if you have a quilt exhibit that has items in it that have been borrowed, you need to get them out of here by 5 o'clock on Friday because we're shutting the museum.
That is craziness. That's craziness.
Yeah. So we're those quilt collections and the museums themselves are very often at the whim of forces well beyond their control.
That's craziness. Yeah, and what I thought was really interesting about Nebraska was it's the quilt studies program. I'm curious if you've had any experience with that. I'm really fascinated. It seems like one of the only ones in the country that's part of their.
I believe it is the only one in the country where you can do distance learning. You are required in that program, which is a graduate program.
Uh-huh.
You are required to spend at least one semester on campus.
Interesting.
But you can do a lot of the learning at distance, and you can take a lot of the courses in the summertime, which is sometimes the more hospitable time to study in Nebraska than the winter.
Yes, I can imagine that's true. I hadn't thought about that part. That's funny.
People who study there and are in that program, of course, have the advantage of that entire lexicon, if you will, of antique quilts that are stored there. But they also have the expertise of people like Michael James, who is cutting edge as far as art quilts are concerned, and he's a participant as well as an historian of art quilts, and so it's a very broadly based program.
I didn't get that. That's great.
Well, I think it's a very important resource.
Yeah, hugely. I think it's really interesting. I've been looking a little bit into it. I find it fascinating and so cool that they did it as an online program, that it will reach as more people by being able to do it that way.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So I have a couple more things I want to ask you about. I want to ask you a little bit about your experience of running Quilt America. I also want to ask you a little bit about your thoughts about sort of building blocks and sort of a little bit of copyright sort of thrown in there. And then I want to ask you about what your favorite things are about quilting. So let's start first with, you ran Quilt America, which was a convention, right, in Indianapolis. Am I right?
Yes. Yes.
Tell me about that experience and what role, because this is where we met, was at Quilt Market in the gargantuan, the huge quilt festival. And so what role do these things, so they go on all over the country, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about sort of the role of conventions, quilt conventions, in the field.
I think they're important because they bring together a number of aspects of the quilt world, if you will. Certainly the commercial sources. For many people, this is an opportunity for many, mostly women, of course. This is an opportunity to see what the newest advances in various kinds of tools and techniques are available because they've all been brought into one location. Mm-hmm. And classes, there are classes offered at these conventions. There are the vendors who are selling everything from thread to books to full long arm machines to antique quilts. It's just a tremendous meeting of all of the interests in one place.
Yeah, it is remarkable. I went with each day I had a different helper or assistant working with me, and it was amazing to watch not only sort of the beauty and sort of the bigness of all of it, but we all saw different things. That these are, I know some conventions are sort of focused on some particular thing, but there's so much there that you can find what it is. Either you find new things that you're interested in, or you sort of seek out the things that that are interesting to you. So it really does show you how much variety there is. It really is incredible. And you were there with Legacy Quilts. Can you tell me a little bit more about Legacy Quilts?
It's a business that I started in 1980, having sort of played with the idea beforehand. I had helped to have a couple of community quilt shows in my town, and one of the things that I learned just casually from doing that was that a lot of the quilt owners, first of all, were elderly women, older women, more mature women. How about that? Mm-hmm. Many of them were widowed. Many of them found themselves the custodians of more things than they could care for, and they wanted to sell, but they didn't know how to go about it. And so I understood the dilemma of being uninformed and going to someone who is an outlet for the product that you have, the item that you have, and asking that person, I have this to sell, what's it worth? There's a certain possibility of the fox watching the hen house there. And so these women were often reluctant to take their things into an antique shop and ask for what they hoped was a decent price for the item, because they could never be sure. They didn't know. And so it occurred to me that if you can sell houses on consignment, if you will, as a broker, you could represent the seller, then you ought to be able to sell quilts like that too. And so that's what I have always done. I sell quilts on consignment. I represent the seller, and I offer their product for sale. We arrive at a price between us that we are both happy with, and then I expose that item to the general buying public and hope that they see it as a viable opportunity to buy.
That's really interesting. How long do you have the quilts when they're on consignment? Are they for a long time, or if they don't sell, you give them back to the person?
That's usually on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes an owner will say, well, I'll let you, I'd like you to try to sell this for me right away. If you haven't sold it by X time, then maybe I should take it home. Otherwise, I will keep it as long as it takes to sell it.
Interesting.
And of course, the owner is always invited to be in touch with me if there are any questions or concerns about how things are going.
And
because it takes the right buyer, it takes the willing buyer and a willing seller.
Yeah.
And those connections are not just easily made.
Yeah. How are, a couple questions. I'm curious about pricing. I imagine that you've developed a way of pricing over the years so that your expertise is informing how much to price them at. Is that right? Yeah.
It's really based on what I see as the market.
Yeah. And do you see the market shifting in pricing, or does it stay rather stable?
It depends on where you are in the country.
Really?
Yeah, well, prices are higher on both coasts than they are in the middle of the country. Everything I'm selling, of course, is one of a kind, and that's the nature of the antique quilt market. You can't go out and get another one.
Yeah.
It's identical because they're all one of a kind objects. And so the price can vary depending on all kinds of circumstances surrounding the quilt itself. How old it is, what kind of condition it's in, what kind of background information is available on the seller, if there is such a thing. Does it fit into a particular category? Is it especially rare? And all of those things are really, the price for that is based on the culmination of my experience as someone who's been involved in the marketplace.
That makes a lot of sense. Who's buying the quilts? Someone said to me that maybe it was you. Someone said that sometimes they're being bought by fabric companies to reproduce the fabric. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. Because really the nuclear level of quilts is really the fabrics from which they're made. In fact, that's one of the ways we determine the age of a quilt is by knowing how fabric colors and designs changed over time. So, fabric companies, particularly those that are involved in creating reproduction designs, will often buy quilts that have, particularly scrap quilts with a lot of different fabrics from the same time period in them, buy those as resources for new designs, for new product.
That's really interesting. From my side of it, it's really interesting because they don't have the copyright issues. If they get old enough, then they can kind of do with it what they want.
Actually, that can be a minefield.
It can. Tell me. Yeah.
I did one fabric line with a company, and I don't even know how to start this. I bought a bundle of antique chintz at an auction at the American Quilters Society show, the Paducah show, which is the second largest quilt show in the country, Houston being the largest. And I bought that at a charity auction that was benefiting AQS, and discovered that there were some stampings on some of the fabrics that indicated who the manufacturer was. And the manufacturer was British. And I wanted to do a fabric line based on these fabrics. My husband's in the same profession you are, and he said, you better find out if there's any copyright on those because you don't want to be involved in an international copyright dispute. And so I said, okay, we have to go to England. It all worked out very nicely.
Totally.
But what I ultimately discovered, and it took probably 7 or 8 months to get all this information put together based on those stamps, those markings that were on the fabric pieces that I had, which were the ends of runs at the mills. What I discovered was that they were all designs from a company from the 19th century called Bannister Hall that went bankrupt at the end of the 19th century. And their proceeds and all of their designs were bought by another company, which morphed into John Lewis Partnerships in England, which owns, among other things, taverns and grocery stores and department stores and textile lines. They still owned the patents on all of those designs. So I have seen a number of those designs that I know are Bannister Hall designs being copied by companies in this country. Should they want to do so, John Lewis Partnerships could in fact sue the people who are producing those through productions for copyright infringement.
How old are the fabrics that you're talking about? When were they produced?
Well, the designs themselves, the Bannister Hall designs, started in about 1820. Oh, I take that back. 1810 or so.
Yeah.
So those designs, the patents for those designs were continuously owned by Bannister Hall until the end of the 19th century, then bought in the bankruptcy sale by the second company, which is now a part of John Lewis Partnerships, which has continued in England to renew the patent on those designs.
Got it. Well,
they still own them.
Well, I would love, if you have more information, I'd love to do more research on it and sort of get to the bottom of that, because that's really interesting. That's
that's what the bottom of it is.
Yeah.
There are designs that are still in continuous copyright from the beginning of the 19th century. And the fact that you see a piece of fabric in a quilt and think, oh, this would make a nice design, doesn't necessarily mean that that design is in the public domain.
No, that's true. That's very true. Related to that, I think is what's really, I think what's interesting about this project for me is the two elements, which, well, like others too, but one is fabric, what you're talking about, of, what is protected about a fabric, when is it out of copyright, all those sorts of things. I've been doing a paper on polka dots. And the other one is building blocks. So the common things that we do as quilters, and I know the historians trace that back, but there's a lot of that material is in the public domain. So that the designs that we see, and I find that super interesting too. Some people say...
Now, I have to question then.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what you mean by building blocks and how would they have been copyrighted or patented?
Well, all the building blocks that we see that are, that gets traced back by, is it Barbara Bachman's book that has all the different, you can trace back when the first time you see is that her? The one where you can trace back, yeah, exactly. So if you can date when something originally occurred, we can kind of guess that it's out and everybody can use it. And so there's certain cutoff dates that we can know that, and also just the fact that we all sort of believe that everybody can make a log cabin, that there are certain literally building blocks, right? That's why I think it's funny that these are the blocks that we all use as part of a common language to quilt. And so I'm really curious about that part of it. And I'm sure I haven't started doing the research. I'm still doing the originality and polka dots paper, but I'm really interested to sort of understand more about what you do and what on the academic and the historical side of quilting, to better understand the parameters of property in fabric and the patterns themselves. So that's part of the work that this project will do.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Who's the target audience for this project?
Good question. The target audience is, I think, two targets. One is just the average quilter that might be interested in learning more about whatever it is that we're talking about for the day. And then on my side of it, and then eventually, some sort of materials and work on intellectual property for quilters so they can sort of understand it. And we've been talking about how to do that. And then on my side of it is more academic side of it. So I think that a lot of times people think of quilters as, oh, well, my grandma made a quilt. And it's a lot more...
ladies in rocking chairs.
Right, exactly. And it's a lot more complicated. And there are a lot of different people doing studies in intellectual property on different areas. So we've done one on video games. People have done it on roller derby or tattoos. And so really understanding what the quilting industry is and kind of taking a deep dive is what intellectual property professors are doing right now. So I'm really trying to understand the whole scope of quilting to better understand what the social norms are and what role intellectual property plays in that. So that's my academic side. And also I'm trying to quilt every night. So I'm trying to experience and understand it from the inside. So yeah, so I'm not good. I'm not a good quilter, but I'm dedicated. I'm very dedicated. Just not, that's right. So
well,
yeah.
If you don't get pleasure out of it, there's no reason to do it.
Oh, I totally agree. And you were saying that you started quilting in your 50s. I turned 50 this year, and I became a full professor. So my dean asked me what I wanted to do next, and I said, I think I want to do a quilting and copyright project. So my family thinks it's very funny that I'm like, I'm working, like this is my academic work. I have to quilt every night, so it's my quilting time. So
you have to defend your choice.
Exactly. This is for research purposes that I'm, free motion quilting a baby blanket at 2 a.m. So that's kind of.
Let me interject with another resource.
Yeah.
That you might find interesting, and that is that. I think largely because of the success of the American Quilt Study Group, there are lots of smaller groups around the country that do a lot of the same things the American Quilt Study Group does on a smaller scale and more often.
Cool.
So there are antique quilt study groups literally all over the country, and I belong to one that's largely based in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, but we have members in 17 states, and it's called Midwest Fabric Study Group, and we meet 4 or 5 times a year, and we go to various locations and ask if we can see their quilts. If they are interested in having us offer ourselves as a resource for them, with perhaps telling that agency more about the quilts that they own. We do that, and we also offer hands-on helping with refolding and that sort of thing. We try to provide them with enough resource funding that they can perhaps get adequate storage boxes and all. And we all do research.
That's so cool.
Something buzzing. Is it all right?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. So, where in Tennessee are you?
I'm in New Orleans. That's where I am.
Where are you in New Orleans?
Yeah,
okay.
but we are. But I like to travel. So I think it would be great to chat with them and also find out more about that. I would love for you. We also have. You don't have to. But I'm calling them our quilting army, which is like super experts that can help along the way to think through problems. And I would love for you to be part of that. So as I start to learn and come back to you and chat more, it would be super great if you're willing. I would love it. Okay, awesome. I'm so excited. Well, I think the next step for me, besides following up on all the things that you talked about, is for me to start to read and do my homework, because I haven't started doing the history and the history side of quilting in any serious fashion, just kind of noodling around. So I would love to chat more with you about that and where to start. And if you have any ideas, I would love for you to email me or chat with me, and then we can start to think about how to. I'll talk to Pam as well. So. Sort of how to attack this part of the project, which is understanding the quilting.
You really have undertaken a life's work.
I know. Well, my last project lasted 10 years, so I'm in for a while. So, but this has been so lovely, and I hope it's the first of many conversations we have about quilting, because it would be super fun.
Well, that would be great.
All right, awesome. Anything else? Any place you think I should start in terms of quilting history? You think I should just start at with the journals at the American Quilt Study Group?
Yes, read all the American Quilt Study Group journals. And there's one for every year. With Barbara Brackman.
Barbara Brackman.
almost all of the states have had collecting activities in their states and have collected quilts, and so you can. They're not strong on continuous history, but they're very good on showing you what was available at that time and place in that state, and so you get a good cross section when you look at a lot of those state research books.
Oh, that's very cool. That's really cool.
And there's other stuff, but titles are easier to discuss on email than they are.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
and I think what I want to also do is sort of get an understanding of time periods so that I can kind of make sure that I'm covering and understanding it. I feel like it's another oral exam. Like a long time ago, 20 years ago, I did my oral exams, but I'm ready for it. So I keep teasing my family that I really, really want to do the quilt studies program, but it's just like a little too much. I don't know, but maybe not.
You need to join the American Quilt Study Group.
I think that sounds great.
It would give you a really good basis, and it would give you a tremendous personal resource as far as people to reach out to. Because,
I think that'd be great.
The roster that we get, the directory that we get every year, not only has an alphabetical listing of every member and her interests, but there's also another section that divides everybody up by state and another section that divides everybody up in their interest categories.
That's great. Yep, I think that definitely has to be on the list. And that's in the fall, right? That you guys meet in the fall?
But you can join anytime, and I would urge you to do it now because when the information for the upcoming seminar comes out in the spring, you want to be sure that you're already a member.
Yeah.
So
okay. Okay, cool.
You can go online to the AmericanQuiltStudyGroup.org and you can join there. Be sure to say that you want your copy of the quarterly newsletter, which is called Blanket Statements, that you want to get it online digitally because you get everything in color.
Oh, cool.
If you ask for a paper copy, it's all black and white.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Awesome. Well, this has been fantastic. I really do appreciate it. And I will start studying, and hopefully I will email you soon, and we can have some more conversations as I start to learn.
That'd be great, Elizabeth.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, fabulous. Have a good day. Take care. Bye. So this is Elizabeth Townsend Guard. You've been listening to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School. We want to hear from you. Join our army, our quilting army. Go to our Facebook page. Suggest people to be interviewed. Suggest yourself to be interviewed. We are excited to hear from you. But most importantly, I hope you get a chance to quilt today.